Hello friends, welcome to my channel CHEETO Club. It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah, a young journalist, was on her way to investigate a mysterious train that was said to be haunted. The train, known as the Midnight Express, was rumored to be carrying a dark and sinister presence that had been terrorizing passengers for years. As Sarah boarded the train, she couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of her stomach. The train was old and rickety, with creaky wooden seats and dimly lit carriages. The air was thick with the smell of decay and rot, and Sarah could feel the weight of the train's dark history bearing down on her. As the train chugged out of the station, Sarah made her way to the empty carriage at the back of the train. She had been warned not to sit in this carriage, but she was determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. As she sat down, she noticed a strange symbol etched into the wall. It looked like a cross between a hieroglyph and a warning sign. Suddenly, the train lurched violently, and Sarah was thrown against the seat in front of her. She heard a loud scream, followed by the sound of footsteps running down the corridor. She tried to stand up, but her legs felt like lead, and she was unable to move. The train continued to chug along, but Sarah knew that something was terribly wrong. She heard strange noises, like whispers and creaks, and she began to feel like she was being watched. She tried to call out for help, but her voice was hoarse and barely audible. As the train approached the first station, Sarah saw a figure standing on the platform. It was a woman, dressed in a long black coat, with a white face and sunken eyes. The woman stared at Sarah, her eyes boring into her soul, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The train stopped and the woman boarded. She walked down the corridor, her eyes fixed on Sarah, and Sarah felt like she was being pulled towards her. The woman sat down next to Sarah, and Sarah felt a cold, clammy hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to the Midnight Express," the woman hissed, her voice like a snake slithering through the grass. "You'll never leave." Sarah tried to scream, but her voice was trapped in her throat. The woman leaned in close, her breath cold and rank, and Sarah felt like she was being sucked into a living nightmare. As the train continued on its journey, Sarah was subjected to a series of terrifying and supernatural events. She saw ghostly apparitions, heard disembodied voices, and felt like she was being pulled towards some unknown and sinister force. She tried to escape, but the doors were locked, and the windows refused to budge. She was trapped, alone, and defenseless, on a train that seemed to be driven by a malevolent spirit. As the night wore on, Sarah began to lose hope. She was convinced that she would never escape the Midnight Express, and that she would be trapped forever in this living hell. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The train pulled into a station, and the doors opened with a hiss. Sarah stumbled out onto the platform, gasping for air, and looked around in confusion. The station was deserted, except for a figure standing on the platform. It was the woman in black, and she was staring at Sarah with a malevolent grin. "You should have stayed on the train," she hissed, before turning and disappearing into the darkness. Sarah was left standing alone on the platform, wondering if she had really escaped the Midnight Express, or if she had simply been let off at a different stop on the journey to hell. As she looked around, she realized that she was not alone. There were others on the platform, watching her, waiting for her. And then she heard the sound of the train chugging away into the distance, leaving her behind. But Sarah knew that she would never be able to escape the Midnight Express. She had been on the train, and the train had been inside her. She was forever changed, haunted by the memories of that terrible night. And as she stood there, frozen in fear, she knew that she would always be trapped on the Midnight Express, reliving the horror, forever doomed to ride the scary and horror train. As Sarah stood on the platform, she felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that she had to get out of there as fast as she could. She started to run, but her legs felt heavy, as if they were stuck to the ground. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, but there was no one there. The footsteps got louder and closer, and Sarah knew that she had to keep running. She ran as fast as she could, but the footsteps kept getting closer and closer. She could feel the breath on the back of her neck, and she knew that she was running out of time. Just when she thought that all was lost, Sarah saw a light in the distance. She ran towards it, and as she got closer, she saw that it was a taxi. She jumped in and slammed the door shut behind her. As the taxi drove away from the station, Sarah looked back and saw the woman in black standing on the platform watching her. She knew that she had escaped the Midnight Express, but she also knew that the horror was far from over. The taxi driver looked at her in the rearview mirror and asked, "Where to, miss?" Sarah thought for a moment and then said, "Take me to the police station." As the taxi drove through the streets, Sarah tried to process what had just happened. She knew that she had to tell the police about the Midnight Express and the woman in black. But as she looked out of the window, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The woman in black was standing on the sidewalk, watching her. Sarah knew that she was in grave danger. The taxi driver looked at her again and asked, "Are you okay, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah tried to smile, but she couldn't. She knew that she had seen something truly evil. As the taxi pulled up to the police station, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. She knew that she was safe now. But as she got out of the taxi and walked into the police station, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. The woman in black was standing in the lobby, watching her. Sarah knew that she was in trouble. The woman in black had followed her to the police station. Sarah ran to the front desk and told the officer on duty what had happened. The officer looked at her skeptically, but Sarah knew that she had to convince him that the woman in black was real. Just as the officer was about to dismiss her, the woman in black walked up to the desk and smiled at Sarah. "Hello, Sarah," she said. "I've been waiting for you." Sarah knew that she was in grave danger. The woman in black had found her, and she was not going to let her go. The officer looked at the woman in black and then back at Sarah. He knew that something was wrong. "Who are you?" he asked the woman in black. The woman smiled again and said, "I'm the conductor of the Midnight Express, and Sarah here is one of my passengers." The officer looked at Sarah and then back at the woman in black. He knew that he had to do something. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said. The woman in black smiled again and said, "I'm not going anywhere. Sarah and I have unfinished business." Sarah knew that she was in trouble. The woman in black was not going to let her go. The officer called for backup, and soon the police station was swarming with officers. They arrested the woman in black and took her away. Sarah was left standing in the lobby, feeling shaken but relieved. She knew that she had finally escaped the midnight express. But as she turned to leave, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The woman in black was standing in the back of the police car watching her. Sarah knew that she was not safe yet. The woman in black was still out there, and she was not going to give up easily. As Sarah walked out of the police station, she knew that she had to be careful. The woman in black was still on the loose, and Sarah was her next target. Sarah decided to go into hiding. She knew that it was the only way to stay safe. As she hid in a safe house, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in black was still watching her. She knew that she had to stay hidden until the woman in black was caught. But as the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to feel like she was losing her mind. She was trapped in the safe house, unable to leave. And then one night, Sarah heard a noise outside. She knew that it was the woman in black. Sarah tried to call for help, but the phone was dead. She was trapped. The woman in black broke into the safe house and found Sarah. She smiled at Sarah and said, "I've been waiting for you, Sarah," the woman in black said, her voice dripping with malice. "You think you can hide from me? You think you can escape the midnight express?" Sarah tried to scream, but her voice was frozen in her throat. The woman in black began to laugh, a cold, mirthless sound that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "You should have stayed on the train, Sarah," the woman in black said, her eyes glinting with malevolence. "Now, you'll never be able to escape." Sarah tried to run, but her legs were frozen with fear. The woman in black reached out and grabbed her, pulling her back into the darkness. As Sarah was dragged away, she saw the safe house disappear into the distance. She knew that she was being taken back to the midnight express, back to the horror that she had tried to escape. The woman in black threw Sarah onto the train, slamming the door shut behind her. Sarah landed hard on the floor, the wind knocked out of her. As she looked up, she saw the woman in black standing over her, a cruel smile on her face. "Welcome back to the Midnight Express, Sarah," she said. "You'll never leave." The train began to move, chugging out of the station and into the darkness. Sarah knew that she was trapped on a train that was driven by a malevolent spirit. As the train rumbled on, Sarah saw the woman in black disappear into the shadows. She knew that she was alone on a train that was hurtling towards a destination that she could not imagine. The hours passed, and Sarah grew more and more desperate. She knew that she had to escape, but she had no idea how. As the train rumbled on, Sarah began to feel a sense of hopelessness. She knew that she was trapped on a train that was driven by a malevolent spirit. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the train stopped. The lights flickered, and Sarah heard the sound of footsteps outside her carriage. The door opened, and a figure loomed in the doorway. Sarah saw that it was a man with a kind face and a warm smile. "Hello, Sarah," he said. "My name is John. I'm here to help you." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She didn't trust this man. She didn't trust anyone on this train. But as she looked into John's eyes, she saw something there that gave her hope. She saw kindness and compassion and a deep understanding of the horror that she had endured. "Come with me, Sarah," John said, holding out his hand. "I'll help you escape this train. I'll help you escape the Midnight Express." Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But as she looked into John's eyes, she knew that she had no choice. She had to trust him. She took John's hand, and he pulled her to her feet. Together, they walked out of the carriage and into the unknown. As they walked, Sarah felt a sense of hope that she had not felt in hours. She knew that she was not alone, that there was someone on this train who was willing to help her. But as they walked, Sarah also knew that they were not safe. The woman in black was still on the train, and Sarah knew that she would stop at nothing to keep her prisoner. As they walked, Sarah heard the sound of footsteps behind them. She turned to see the woman in black emerging from the shadows, her eyes blazing with fury. "You'll never escape," the woman in black hissed. "You'll never leave the Midnight Express." Sarah knew that she was in grave danger. She knew that she had to get off the train, and fast. But as she turned to run, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. It was John, and he was pulling her back. "Don't worry, Sarah," he said. "I've got a plan. We'll get off this train together." Sarah turned to him, her eyes filled with hope. She knew that she had to trust him, had to trust that he would get her off the train alive. As they walked, Sarah felt a sense of determination that she had not felt in hours. She knew that she was not going to let the woman in black win. She was going to escape the Midnight Express, no matter what it took. But as they walked, Sarah also knew that the woman in black was not going to give up easily. She was going to fight to keep Sarah prisoner, and Sarah knew that she had to be prepared. As they approached the end of the train, Sarah saw a glimmer of light in the distance. She knew that it was the door that led to freedom. But as they reached the door, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. It was a woman in black, and she was pulling Sarah back. "You'll never leave the Midnight Express," the woman in black hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. Sarah tried to struggle, but the woman in black was too strong. She pulled Sarah back into the train, back into the darkness. John tried to intervene, but the woman in black was too powerful. She pushed him aside and he fell to the ground. Sarah was trapped on the train with no way to escape. She knew that she was doomed to ride the Midnight Express forever. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The train came to a halt, and the lights flickered back to life. Sarah looked around, confused. What had happened? And then she saw John, standing in the doorway, a look of triumph on his face. "I did it," he said, smiling. "I'll stop the train." Sarah stared at him, amazed. How had he done it? John walked over to her and helped her to her feet. "We have to get out of here," he said. "Now." Sarah nodded, still in shock. She followed John out of the train, into the bright sunlight. As they walked away from the train, Sarah turned back to look at it. The Midnight Express was sitting there, silent and still. But as she looked at it, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. The woman in black was standing in the doorway watching her. Sarah knew that she was not safe. Not yet. The woman in black was still out there, waiting for her. But as she turned to John, Sarah saw something that gave her hope. He was smiling at her, his eyes shining with kindness. "We'll get through this," he said. "Together." Sarah smiled back at him, feeling a sense of gratitude towards this stranger who had saved her life. As they walked away from the train, Sarah knew that she was not alone. She had John, and together they would face whatever horrors lay ahead. But as they walked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She looked back over her shoulder, but there was no one there. Or was there? Sarah's heart was racing as she walked, her senses on high alert. She knew that the woman in black was still out there, waiting for her. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went black. Sarah woke up to find herself in a hospital bed, John sitting beside her. "What happened?" she asked, groggily. "You fainted," John said, smiling. "But don't worry, you're safe now. The woman in black is gone." Sarah's eyes narrowed. How did John know that? But before she could ask him, the doctor came in, smiling. "You're going to be okay," he said. "But we need to keep you here for a few days, just to make sure." Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She was safe finally. But as she looked at John, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. He was smiling at her, but his eyes were black as coal. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went black again. Sarah woke up to find herself alone in the hospital room. John was gone, but there was a note on the bedside table. "Meet me at the old warehouse at midnight," it said. "Come alone." Sarah's heart was racing as she read the note. What did John want from her? And then, as she looked around the hospital room, Sarah realized that something was terribly wrong. The hospital room was empty, except for her. And the window was open, the curtains blowing in the wind. Sarah knew that she had to get out of there fast. She threw off the covers and ran to the door, but it was locked. She was trapped. And then, as she turned around, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. The woman in black was standing in the corner of the room, watching her. Sarah knew that she was doomed. The woman in black had found her, and she was not going to let her go. As the woman in black began to move towards her, Sarah knew that she had to think fast. She had to come up with a plan, and fast. But as she looked around the hospital room, Sarah realized that she was trapped. There was no way out. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went black again. Sarah woke up to find herself back on the Midnight Express. The woman in black sitting across from her. "Welcome back," the woman in black said, smiling. "You'll never leave this train." Sarah knew that she was doomed. She was trapped on the Midnight Express with no way to escape. And as the train rumbled on, Sarah knew that she would never be able to escape the horror that lurked within. As the train rumbled on, Sarah felt a sense of despair wash over her. She was trapped, and she knew it. The woman in black smiled at her, seeming to sense her despair. "You'll never escape," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "This train will take you to a place where you'll never be seen again." Sarah shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She knew she had to think of a way to escape, but her mind was a blank. As the train rumbled on, Sarah heard a faint noise coming from outside the carriage. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and deliberate. The woman in black heard them too, and her smile faltered for a moment. "What's that?" she muttered to herself. Sarah's heart leapt with hope. Could it be someone coming to rescue her? The footsteps grew louder, and Sarah could tell that whoever it was, they were trying to be quiet. But the woman in black was on her feet, her eyes blazing with fury. "Who's there?" she screamed, her voice echoing down the corridor. There was no answer, but the footsteps grew louder still. Sarah could tell that whoever it was, they were getting closer. Suddenly, the door to the carriage burst open, and a figure loomed in the doorway. It was John, the man who had helped her escape from the train before. "I've come to get you," he said. His eyes locked on Sarah. The woman in black let out a scream of rage and launched herself at John. But he was ready for her, and he grabbed her wrists, holding her back. "Let's get out of here," he said to Sarah, his eyes locked on hers. Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled to her feet and followed John out of the carriage, leaving the woman in black screaming behind them. As they ran down the corridor, Sarah could hear the woman in black's screams growing fainter. She knew they had to keep moving, had to get as far away from the train as possible.